Hi there, Jeff Lerner, and in this video we're going to be talking about whether or not you should rent or buy your home. Obviously, it's kind of a big deal which one you decide to do, and it's pretty darn important to get it right. So let's make sure we do that and talk about the various factors and considerations to make sure that we do. Renting versus buying. You know, I made a video, gosh, I don't know, it's been maybe 6 months, and it originally put it on Facebook, then it later aired on YouTube, and it was basically my argument for why a lot of people, it actually made sense to rent your home versus buying your home. And man, it was like, I had no idea that I was going to touch such a nerve with this topic. People got so upset, and I realized, and I guess it makes sense looking back, I realized that like, this idea, this paradigm of like your home is your greatest asset. Your home is how the average person builds wealth over the course of their life. Your home is your retirement plan for a lot of families. Your home is your legacy. Like it's a big deal psychologically for a lot of people, the idea that the home is this thing. And, you know, I remember in my early 20s reading Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and going on to read some of his other books and kind of being exposed to this idea that your home is actually not an asset, it's a liability, that it's the single biggest expense in most people's lives. It doesn't actually produce income in most people's lives. And Robert Kiyosaki's definition of an asset was things that produce income, and liability were things that are an expense or cost money. And certainly the house would fit in the expense category by that definition. And so it always kind of been with me that, hey, you know, it's about income, it's about cash flow, it's about, or I say always, at least since my early 20s, I'd been very, you know, concerned about my personal cash flow, my own personal economy. Where's money coming in? Where's money going out? And in that regard, you know, obviously we have to live, we have to have a place, and there's typically a cost associated with that unless we, I don't know, live with our parents rent-free or something. And so for me, it was never really about renting versus buying. It was just about math. You know, what's the best economic decision, and you know, both short-term cash flow, which is really important to me because as a business owner, someone, you know, my cash flow is my lifeblood, but also, you know, present value of future assets and future cash flows and future borrowability and all the things that come with owning a house and building equity over time. Like it was all just a big math problem to me. The day I suggested on a video that perhaps the math in some cases favored not actually owning your own home, perhaps ever for some people, man, I really set some people off, and I had people attacking me and people saying this guy's an idiot. And admittedly, in that video, I probably took an overly strong stance on renting versus buying. Rather than saying you should rent or you should buy, it's more, let's discuss the various factors involved and look at everything to consider so that each person can make the best decision for them. And that's the intent of this video. So the first thing we're going to look at are the tangible factors, the factors that have to do with the physical logistics and mechanics of living in a certain property. Then we're going to be looking at the intangible factors. Then we're going to be looking at the specific cost factors. So let's start with tangible factors. These are the things that, depending on, you know, your personal preferences, they're going to be tangibly, perhaps even measurably important to you in making the decision about which property to live in. They are location, safety, schools, public transportation, walkability, commute or time to commute to and from work, proximity to shopping, proximity to recreation, and the relative market supply factors of your particular market. So let's walk through those real quick. I think most of those are pretty self-explanatory, but we'll just talk through them real quick. Location obviously means a lot of different things, but specifically in terms of location, we're talking about the value proposition of that location. If you're in an area where you're going to get, with high probability, a really intense upside to your property in terms of appreciation and increase in value, that's something to consider. The safety, obviously, I think we all know what that means. And sometimes those go hand in hand because a lot of times there's major upside to getting into areas that are perhaps going through, a gentrification or some kind of an overhaul. But a lot of times getting in early on those neighborhoods correlates to perhaps maybe getting in on an area that's got a little more of a rough edge to it. And I know I own some properties down in Houston that I bought over a decade ago when frankly I would have maybe even been a little bit nervous to live in those properties. They were close to downtown. The area was going through kind of an urban renewal, and now they're literally worth double, maybe even in some cases 2.5 times what I paid for them. But again, they would have been a little dicey to live in at the time. I bought them as investments, but I wouldn't have bought them as a primary residence. So safety obviously is a big one. Schools, if you have a family. When I was buying properties down there, I didn't have kids. It wasn't a factor for me, although it's always a factor in terms of the long-term value of the property, and particularly in certain markets. I know I have a good friend who's one of the top real estate agents down in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and down there he's like, it's all about schools. You'll literally have houses that are a block or two apart, but they're zoned to different schools, and they can have dramatically different price per square foot and different value factors just because of the school. So that's something to think about, obviously, for your own family if you have one, but also in terms of the value of your property. Public transportation obviously is a factor, particularly as it relates to maybe having a certain job, or obviously if you need public transportation. Walkability, it's essentially it just means what is it within walking distance. That can be a big value factor. A lot of people, especially if you're in a more temperate climate, a lot of people like to take walks. And commute times, both for yourself personally, that's a tangible factor in terms of your own quality of life, but also it affects the value of a property. If it's a long way from the commercial centers or the industrial centers, the hubs of employment, that can be an adverse factor for the value of your property. Shopping, recreation, kind of tend to go hand in hand, but in terms of both walking and also driving, to access those nice facets of city life. And then also I said market supply factor. So what that means is days on market. And the way you're going to assess that is either talk to a real estate professional or maybe go online and look at your local real estate database, your local MLS, is probably what it's called if you live in the United States, and actually see how many days are properties in my sort of category, roughly my square footage and price range, how many days are they sitting on the market? If you're looking in a neighborhood and you've got the average days on market is 200, properties are sitting for a long time, they're not selling, that's going to tell you that perhaps there's an opportunity to get better value in the property. But also if you see that the average days on market is 5 and properties are, never around for more than a few weeks, that's going to tell you that, get while you can, and perhaps there's a premium to pay because there's demand for that area. And similar with rentals versus purchases, you can look and see are rental properties going faster or slower relative to purchase properties for sale. And those can all feed into your understanding of the market. Basically, again, if you've watched enough of my videos, you know that it's going to come down to the math for me. And there's even a qualitative math to it, but the qualitative math is still going to show up in quantitative math because the factors that are important to me or you for quality of life tend to be important to most people. Something like how close is it to shopping? That may be important to you for quality of life reasons, but it's also going to be important to other people, which means it's going to show up as part of the actual mathematical value of the property. So this is all stuff to try to factor in and create a sort of a calculus for in terms of how good an investment, how good of a value is your property going to be. For me, it's hard to justify saying, well, buy a home just because it feels good to buy a home. And I know that I'm about to talk about intangible factors, and in those intangible factors, there are going to be some touchy-feely kinds of things, and maybe that's different strokes for different folks. But to me, your home is, for a lot of people, the single biggest financial decision that you'll make in your entire life. I think if you're gonna push yourself to be sort of an empiricist or non-emotional about anything in your life, shouldn't it be perhaps about the biggest single decision that you make financially in your life? If you're going to be non-emotional about anything, that's probably it. But again, that's I'm just I'm that way. So anyway, that said, let's talk about the intangible factors to consider in whether or not to, purchase or rent a home, or simply which property to acquire. Ultimately, whether or not to purchase or rent can simply come down to saying, well, what property do I want to live in, and is it for sale or is it for rent, right? It doesn't even have to necessarily be a philosophical or a principled or dogmatic decision about which one you want to do. It could simply be, where do I want to live and what's available there, right? In certain cities, I used to live in New York City, for example. I used to live in Lower Manhattan, and it wasn't about, well, do I want to rent or do I want to own? It was simply about what's available. And where I lived in Tribeca, it was rent. I had to rent. I wasn't looking to invest $4 million at that point in my life in owning a property. And so to be able to live in any reasonable way, I simply had to rent. That was my option. Anyway, okay, let's talk about intangible factors. The first one is stability. So actually, let me read them off again. I made a little list. Stability, financial predictability, freedom of renovation, pride of ownership, growing equity, and the flexibility to move. So we have 6 intangible factors. We'll talk through them quickly here. Stability basically means it's up to you. You can't be forcibly removed from the property by a landlord. Landlords, you sign a lease. When the lease is up, they don't have to renew the lease. You could love the place, but after 6 months or 12 months or whatever the term of the lease is, they could say, yeah, but I want to sell it. I want to fix it up. I want to lease it to my brother. They don't have to give you a reason, right? They could just say, nope, got to go. Obviously, if you own the home, that can't happen. Next is financial predictability. Obviously, if you own the home on a fixed rate mortgage, your payment's not going to change. Your taxes might change a little bit. Your insurance costs might change a tiny bit, but generally the base cost of the house isn't going to change much. Whereas if you rent the property, you can realistically expect it to increase slightly year over year. Freedom to renovate, that one's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, if you want to add another bedroom to a home that you own, you might have to get a permit, but usually they're going to grant it as long as you don't overly disrupt the front aesthetic of the house, and violate your ordinances or your neighborhood covenants or whatnot. But if you rent a property, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to make any significant modifications to the property. Pride of ownership, which again, this is one that's kind of touchy-feely, so it's a little hard for me. I'd much rather have the pride of financial stewardship or the pride of being a smart business person or making smart business and financial decisions. I'm more proud of that than simply owning something. But, again, some people, it's just built into their DNA or their culture, or their family training, or they're indoctrinated that I got to own a home, right? I got to own me a piece of, it's like kind of a warm blanket they want to wrap around themselves. And I get that, again, if that's what you need, then that's a factor to consider, is that you might want to own your home for that reason. Growing equity, again, to me, it's all a big math equation, and I don't care, if I want to borrow money in the future, I don't care if it's against my house or against other investments. I just care about the interest rate and the liquidity and, how easy it is to access. But for some people, they like the idea of their house as this fortress of security. Maybe you want to get a reverse mortgage in the future. Maybe I should do another video about that and try to talk you out of it. But, I get it that people are just attached to that idea sometimes. And then, of course, the freedom to move, just like I said, your landlord can't boot you out if you own the home. Also, your landlord can't force you to stay. They can't say, well, you did a 12-month lease and it's only been 5 months, so you have to stay another 7 months. If you own the home, you can move anytime you want. You don't have to live there. You can let other people stay there. You can sell it. You could turn around and lease it out. You have options like that. So those are the intangible factors. And then finally, let's look at the cost factors. The biggest one for most people is a down payment, having to save up, typically 20% of the value of or the cost to purchase the home is a big hurdle for a lot of people. And what a lot of people maybe don't as much consider is not just the cost of the down payment, but the opportunity cost of saving up that much money and putting it into your home, as opposed to putting it into a different type of investment that could potentially pay you more, have more upside, but also obviously could have more risk. That's the factor you make. But a lot of people, fail to consider. They say, I got to save up money to buy a home. No, you got to save up money to be able to invest so that you can have a better life. And one option for that is your home, but there could be other options as well, and you might want to consider them. And then closing costs, typically 3 to 5%. So if you're talking about a 20% down payment, you're talking about another 15 to 25% of the amount of the down payment. If your closing costs are going to be 3 to 5%, that's something you're going to have to save up as well to purchase a home. And then you have obviously the fixed monthly cost. This is where I typically do the analysis to say, am I going to get more value over time on a monthly cost basis, renting versus owning? For me, it's like a car. I need a car. I want to spend as little money per month on the car as possible, but still get the car that I want, right? That's how I look at a house. I want the house that I want the living arrangement that I want, and I want it to impact my monthly cash flow as little as possible. But again, that's a psychology of somebody who feels confident about his ability to take money and strategically turn it into more money. So I actually think, hey, I'd rather just spend less on my house so that I can have, whatever the excess margin is that I save by renting or buying, depending on, these other factors. I can take that and put it somewhere else and perhaps generate even more return. But understanding the fixed monthly costs of home ownership versus home renting. And then, of course, maintenance, which is more of a variable cost. And obviously, you're going to incur that if you own the home, probably not so much if you rent. Okay, so there you have it. We've covered a lot of factors. We've covered the tangible factors, the intangible factors, and the pure cost considerations. Again, my encouragement to you is to be as unemotional as you can, allow yourself to be about this decision, and ultimately, really just view, even though the house is the biggest financial instrument of your life, that simply means it's just another tool. It's maybe a bigger tool, but it's just another tool like all the other financial tools in your life. And ultimately, tools are about an end result. I am going to put a calculator down below in the description, a link that you can use to calculate the cost of renting versus buying. Again, it's case by case, it's market by market, it's situation by situation, it's budget by budget. I have learned that if I try to make a hard and fast recommendation, A, the internet's going to blast me, and B, it's probably not as valuable as more just talking through the different ways to think about the issue. That's what I have to say about that. I will invite you, if you want to, continue down this road of being more strategic, more financially astute, and ultimately, one thing I will say is whether you're talking about renting versus buying, or buying a car, or purchasing a vacation, or putting your kids through college, all these conversations get a lot more fun when you have more money. So on my channel, I do talk a fair amount about not just kind of personal finance, but also like business and entrepreneurship, and sales and marketing, and how to increase your value in the world so you get paid more, because that makes all these conversations a lot sexier and cooler to have. So if that all sounds cool to you, but by all means, I'll invite you to subscribe to my channel. My channel is, in a nutshell, it's devoted to helping people have a more awesome life. But an awesome life is something that has to be paid for. So we do talk a lot about how to pay for it, but also relationships, communication, personal development, health, wellness, fitness, just everything about holistically having more awesome and being more awesome and doing more awesome in this world. It's a passion of mine. I'd love it if it'd be a passion of yours, because your life would thank you for it. And if so, subscribe to my channel and we'll keep the conversation going. Thanks for your time. I'll make sure when you do subscribe that you click the little bell to be notified about my future videos. And I'll look forward to seeing you on those future videos. Thanks again. Take care.